The stars stretched in long, scattered lines across the endless void of space. Flash's ship, the Ragged Star, lurched as it tore through the dark. The only sound in the cockpit the hum of the engines and the occasional crackle of static from the comms. Flash leaned forward, eyes narrowed, his hands resting loosely on the controls. His weathered face flickered in the dim light, his stubble and gruff demeanor as sharp as his instincts. The last transmission had been brief, urgent, and garbled. Something about a Mirathi vessel in distress. That didn't happen often. The Mirathi were an ancient, powerful empire, a species with bloodlines so pure they didn't bother with anyone who wasn't worthy. A royal Mirathi ship in trouble. Flash had no idea why they'd send a distress call to him, but the urgency in the transmission had been undeniable. He wasn't the kind to back down from a fight, so he went. His ship cut through the dark like a jagged scar, guided by the red glow of the nearest nebula. A sudden flash of light snapped him from his thoughts, a flare, drifting against the backdrop of the deep void. The wreckage was scattered across an asteroid belt, twisted metal and flashing lights floating like broken toys in the hands of a forgotten child. "Got you," Flash muttered to himself, his voice a low growl. He throttled down, expertly weaving the ship through the debris field, dodging chunks of burning wreckage. A smaller ship, sizable but not enough to rival a warship, was slowly falling apart. Flash's hand tightened on the controls as he aligned his ship with the wreck's remains, the thrusters sputtering as he brought the Ragged Star into a controlled drift. A blinking light on the console caught his eye. Something alive. Barely. He keyed in the readings, eyes scanning the holographic display. Life signs. Faint but still there. One survivor. His fingers flew over the buttons as he began the emergency docking sequence. He wasn't a stranger to picking up survivors from the wreckage of failed missions or out-of-control battles, but this felt different. It was more than just another piece of salvage. Something about this, something about her, didn't sit right. The airlock hissed open. Flash stepped out, his boots thumping against the floor as he made his way through the narrow hall. He found her in the wreckage bay, crumpled against a half-destroyed piece of tech, her chest rising and falling in weak breaths. She was beautiful, in a way that seemed too serene for the destruction around her. Long, dark hair clung to her face, her skin pale, as if she were touched by something older than the stars themselves. Her eyes fluttered open when he knelt beside her, dark pupils swimming with fear and confusion. "Easy," Flash murmured, his voice more gentle than he'd intended. "I've got you." She managed a weak smile, her lips trembling. You shouldn't have come." "Doesn't matter now," Flash said with a grimace. "You're not dying on my watch." He lifted her carefully, supporting her weight as he headed back to the airlock. She didn't resist, but her eyes never left his face, studying him with an intensity that felt both alien and knowing. The moment they passed through the airlock, the ship's artificial gravity kicked in, and Flash gently lowered her onto a nearby bench. The faint pulse of her life signs blinked across his HUD as he started working to stabilize her. "You're Mirathi," he said, his voice low. "A royal, by the looks of it." Her gaze darkened, but she didn't argue. "You don't understand. You've just signed up for something far worse than you can imagine." Flash smirked, glancing at the damaged exterior of his ship. "Doesn't sound much worse than most of my last few jobs." She met his eyes, her voice steady despite her obvious weakness. "You have no idea what you've done." The tension in the air shifted. Flash's smirk faded, replaced by something heavier. She wasn't just a survivor. She was something else entirely. The soft hum of the Ragged Star was the only sound as Flash navigated the dark corridors of his ship, the occasional beep from his ship's systems cutting through the silence. His mind was occupied with the mysterious woman he'd rescued, Princess Solara of the Mirathi Empire. As he made his way to the medbay, he couldn't shake the strange pull he felt toward her, something far deeper than just curiosity. Solara was awake now, her condition stabilized, but she hadn't spoken much since he'd carried her aboard. Her silence was like a wall between them, but Flash didn't mind. He was used to being alone, and the storm of thoughts in his head was enough to occupy his mind. Entering the medbay, Flash moved quickly to the table where Xalara lay, her royal gown, now in tatters, clinging to her frail frame. The dim blue light from the medbay panels reflected off the walls, painting everything with an eerie, soft glow. He set down the scanner and glanced at her face, the mystery of her presence growing by the second. Xalara's eyes flickered open, and Flash stiffened, instinctively backing away. Her gaze was steady and calculating, as if she had been awake for far longer than he realized. "Feeling better?" Flash asked, his voice rough. She didn't respond immediately, but her gaze softened for a fraction of a second before it turned cold again. "Better than I would be if you hadn't saved me," she replied, her voice low and distant. She spoke with a tone that seemed detached, like she was measuring every word before speaking it. Flash grunted and adjusted the controls on the medbay's life support panel. "That's what I do, Princess. Fix problems. But this," he gestured at her, his tone sharp, "this isn't just some thank you job. You're Merathi, and I don't do charity for royal blood." Her lips twitched at the corners, as if amused by his bluntness. "You don't understand." Her voice was almost too soft, like she was speaking to herself rather than him. "You saved me, and now you'll pay the price." Flash raised an eyebrow, his fingers pausing over the scanner. "Price? What price?" Her eyes locked with his, a flicker of something ancient and powerful in their depths. "My people, our people, believe that when life is spared, a debt is owed. It is not a simple matter of thanks. You have taken my life into your hands, and now you must fulfill the debt. You will marry me." Flash took a step back, his heart racing. He thought he had heard her wrong. "Wait, you're telling me that because I pulled you out of a wreckage, I'm somehow married to you?" Her expression didn't change. "In the eyes of Merathi law, yes, a life saved is bound by blood. I am bound to you now." Flash rubbed his face, trying to make sense of what she was saying. "That's not how things work where I'm from. I don't get involved in royal rituals." "You will," she replied flatly, "whether you want to or not." There was an intensity in her voice that sent a shiver down Flash's spine. She wasn't just a helpless alien princess, she was something more. The Merathi Empire was one of the most powerful in the galaxy, their laws ancient and unyielding. If she was telling the truth, Flash had just been entangled in a web far larger than he had imagined. Flash snorted, shaking his head. "This is insane. I just saved you from a wreck, not from some galactic marriage contract." Xalara's lips curled slightly, though her gaze never wavered. "You don't understand the significance. You're now linked to me, in every sense." The weight of her words pressed on him, and for the first time, Flash felt the heavy pulse of destiny knocking at his door. He was no stranger to danger, to getting dragged into things he didn't fully understand. But this was different. This wasn't just about survival. This was something bigger. "You're stuck with me now, Flash," Xalara said, her voice now softer, but no less potent, "whether you like it or not." Flash stared at her, his mind racing. What had he gotten himself into? The ship was silent, too quiet for comfort. Flash sat at the helm of the Ragged Star, his eyes flicking between the control panels and the distant stars outside. He had never been one for ceremonies, and he sure as hell wasn't about to be caught in the middle of some galactic marriage agreement. But here he was, with Princess Xalara, an alien royal whose empire was breathing down his neck. He had no idea how much danger he'd just walked into. Xalara stood across from him, still as regal as ever, despite her disheveled appearance. Her hands rested lightly on the armrests of the captain's chair, the cool blue light of the ship illuminating the sharpness of her features. She wasn't an ordinary princess. There was something fierce behind her eyes, something Flash hadn't fully grasped yet. "I don't like this." Flash muttered, glancing at her. You think they'll stop after what happened back there? Stop. She arched an eyebrow, her voice cold. You don't understand. The Myrathid don't forgive easily. You've crossed them by sparing me. Flash ran a hand through his short hair, letting out a sigh. He'd been in worse situations before, way worse, but this was different. The Myrathi Empire wasn't some ragtag gang of pirates. They had resources, influence, and a brutal sense of justice that didn't tolerate failure. They'll come for us, Solara continued, her tone serious now. They won't stop until they've either reclaimed me or erased you from the galaxy. Reclaimed you? Flash frowned, looking over at her. Are you telling me your people are this hardcore about their laws? Her gaze flicked to him, cold and unwavering. You have no idea. My survival here is the highest insult to them. Flash's brow furrowed as he punched in the coordinates for their next jump. Sounds like a fun way to spend a Saturday, he muttered sarcastically. You think this is a game? Solara's voice hardened. If they get their hands on me, they'll not only kill you, they'll annihilate everything you've ever known. They have no qualms about destroying anyone who defies them. Before Flash could respond, a blaring alarm interrupted them. His eyes snapped to the display, his heart skipping a beat. An unidentified ship had dropped out of hyperspace, too close for comfort. The ship was massive, its dark silhouette blocking out stars as it moved into position behind the ragged star. Shit, Flash growled, slamming his hand on the console. They're here. Solara stood abruptly, her posture straightening. She didn't seem afraid. She was calculating, her eyes already scanning the incoming vessel. Flash activated the ship's shields and fired up the weapon systems, his fingers moving swiftly over the controls. They won't hesitate to destroy us, Solara said, her voice calm, almost detached. They've likely already sent a team to board us. Then we'll give them a welcome, Flash said, more to himself than to her. The ship's sensors flared red, confirming what Flash already knew. Boarders were coming. He grabbed a blaster from the armory and handed it to Solara. She didn't hesitate, taking it with a practiced grip. Stay close, he ordered, his voice firm. Don't worry about me, she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. I've killed Myrathi soldiers before. They're no match for me. Flash gave her a sharp look. He didn't doubt her skills, but this wasn't just any soldier. This was a whole crew of Myrathi elites sent to capture her, and they wouldn't go down easily. Still, the idea of working together, however unlikely, was the only option they had. The hatch on the starboard side of the ship exploded open, and a team of heavily armored Myrathi soldiers stormed in, their weapons raised. Flash didn't flinch. He fired first, taking out 2 of the soldiers with precise shots, but more kept coming. They advanced, their armor glinting in the low light, their red eyes glowing ominously beneath their helmets. Solara moved like lightning, her blaster never missing a shot as she took out 2 more of the attackers. Flash couldn't help but watch as she handled herself. This wasn't just some helpless princess. She was a warrior, trained for battle, and she was damn good at it. The remaining soldiers hesitated, clearly not expecting this kind of resistance. But Flash wasn't about to give them time to regroup. With a grunt, he charged forward, taking out another soldier with a well-placed blast to the chest. Solara was right beside him, fighting with a fury that matched his own. Together, they cleared the room, the Myrathi forces retreating in a disorganized panic. Flash wiped the sweat from his brow, breathing heavily. He couldn't believe how quickly the tide had turned. Solara glanced at him, her expression unreadable. That was a close call. Flash's smirk was sharp. For them, yeah. As they stood in the silence of the aftermath, Flash realized something important. This wasn't just about saving Solara anymore. The station was cold, a silent, sprawling structure floating in the deep dark of space. Its gleaming metal walls reflected the light from distant stars. Its purpose unclear, hidden beneath layers of bureaucracy and tradition. Flash hated places like this, neutral ground where everything was about politics and appearances. But here he was, pulling into one of its docking bays, with Princess Talara at his side. The ceremony, if you could even call it that, was set to happen in just under an hour. Flash had thought, at first, that maybe they could talk their way out of it. Maybe, if he played it right, they could convince the Myrathi Empire to back down, to let him go without some galactic wedding. But that was before Xalarat explained the law, the ancient, unyielding tradition of her people. If he didn't agree to the marriage, if he didn't accept the debt, she could be killed. And even worse, the peace they were trying to broker between her people and the galaxy would collapse. So, here they were, preparing to play their parts in this ridiculous mockery of a union. As Flash led Solara down the cold, metallic hallways of the station, the tension between them had only deepened. She didn't seem bothered by the situation, her face set in its usual stoic mask, but Flash could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her. Maybe, just maybe, the royal facade wasn't as solid as it seemed. "Just play along," Solara said quietly, her voice cool and controlled. "We don't have a choice." "I didn't ask for this," Flash muttered, his voice low, frustrated. "And yet here we are," she replied. There was a sharp edge to her words now, a reminder that even though they were both stuck in this mess, they weren't exactly in the same boat. The door to the ceremonial chamber slid open, and Flash's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the room. It was everything he expected from a high-profile Myrathi event. Opulent, over the top, designed to make a statement. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting an eerie, polished light over the long, marble-like floor. The walls were decorated with intricate carvings, symbols of the Myrathi Empire's might, each one representing power, lineage, and Flash thought bitterly, pride. Solara stepped forward, her posture straight, regal as ever. She was breathtaking in the ceremonial gown they'd given her, but it didn't take a genius to see that she was not comfortable. Not in this place, not in this moment. The officiant, a tall, stern-looking Myrathi elder, his robes flowing like liquid shadow, motioned for them to approach. His eyes flickered briefly to Flash, then back to Xalara, with no sign of recognition. This wasn't a wedding to them. This was business, a necessary formality in the eyes of an empire that placed its ancient laws above everything else. Flash stood beside her, arms crossed, trying to look uninterested despite the rising tension in his chest. He could feel the weight of 1,000 eyes on him, all of them waiting for him to screw this up. Or worse, to make a mistake that could ruin everything. He wasn't here for a royal wedding, but that's what it felt like he was playing some role in a farce, one he couldn't escape. "Do you, Flash Harrigan, take Princess Stalara of the Myrathi Empire to be your bound consort by the laws of her people?" The officiant's voice boomed, his tone commanding, as if this was already settled. Flash hesitated, but only for a moment. He glanced at Solara, and for the first time, he saw a crack in her armor. Her eyes were unreadable, her jaw tight as she waited for his answer. He swallowed, his voice gruff, his heart pounding in his chest. "I do." There was a silence in the room, thick with expectation. The officiant nodded, and the moment the words left Flash's mouth, he realized he had just made a choice, one he hadn't fully understood. A choice that bound him, irrevocably, to this strange, powerful woman, to her empire, to a war he hadn't even realized was coming. The officiant smiled, his expression cold and disinterested. "Then, by the power vested in the Myrathi Empire, you are now bound by blood, by law, and by honor." Flash stood still, feeling a strange knot settle in his gut. He had just done something he couldn't undo, something that changed everything. The stakes had gone up. Now, it wasn't just about surviving anymore. Now, it was about keeping his word. As they walked away from the ceremony, Flash could barely hear the congratulatory murmurs from the Myrathi officials around them. His mind was elsewhere, already calculating the risks of the coming storm. Solara glanced at him, her face unreadable, but there was a faint, almost imperceptible softness in her eyes. "You did well," she said, her voice low. Flash didn't respond. He couldn't. Not yet. His head was spinning, the weight of the decision still settling in his bones. He had just married the enemy. And he didn't even know what it meant to be her husband. The night was thick with tension as the ragged star drifted quietly through the cold expanse of space. Flash stood at the helm, his eyes locked on the glowing screen in front of him, watching the slow rotation of a nearby planet. Solara had taken to her quarters, no doubt buried in the heavy weight of their situation. But Flash couldn't shake the feeling that things were moving faster than he could handle. Their marriage had been the least of their problems. The Myrethi Empire wasn't a peaceful place. The peacekeepers were anything but. In the hours following the ceremony, they had received a series of encrypted messages, a demand for Flash to be handed over, an order for Solara's immediate return. But there was something darker behind it, something that lingered in the cold tone of their demands. The threat wasn't just about a marriage anymore. It was about war. He gripped the edge of the console, his jaw clenched. Flash had always been good at sensing when trouble was brewing. But this felt different. The Empire wasn't just angry. It was calculating, preparing for something big. He glanced at the ship's comm system, half tempted to send out a distress signal. But who could he trust in the Myrethi Empire? Certainly not Solara's people. Just then, the familiar buzz of the comm system broke the silence. Flash froze, his heart skipping a beat. The message was clear but terrifying in its simplicity. "We are coming for you. No escape." The message cut off before Flash could respond. He stared at the screen, the words echoing in his mind. There was no hiding now. The Myrethi were coming, and if they were anything like the soldiers he'd encountered, they weren't planning to show mercy. His fingers drummed anxiously on the console as he thought. He could take his chances and flee, but the Myrethi were relentless. They would hunt him down. He wasn't sure what their plan was, but one thing was clear. He wasn't going to just sit back and let them tear everything apart. Not again. Not when he had someone, to protect. Flash turned to the crew quarter doors, about to call Solara. But before he could speak, the door slid open. She stepped out, her expression unreadable, but there was a fire in her eyes, something he hadn't seen in her before. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low but firm. He nodded, stepping aside to let her in. As she approached the control panel, Flash took in her appearance. Her stance was sharp, almost defensive, like she was preparing for battle. "They're coming," Flash said, his voice grim. "We don't have much time." Solara's gaze hardened. "I know. My people never do anything without a plan." "Then what do we do?" Flash demanded, frustration bubbling up. "I didn't sign up for this. I didn't ask to be dragged into your war." Solara stepped closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You didn't have a choice. I told you, my survival is an affront to my empire. The longer we stay here, the more dangerous it becomes." Flash shot her a look, frustration lacing his features. "I didn't ask to be some pawn in your games. I didn't sign up for war." "You're already in it," she replied, her tone sharp. "The Myrethi don't care if you're a pawn or not. You're part of this now, whether you want it or not." Flash let out a breath, rubbing his temples. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was supposed to just drop her off, get paid, and move on. But the universe had other plans. They all did. "So what's the next move?" he asked, trying to focus, to think through the chaos that had suddenly consumed his life. Solara's eyes met his, her gaze unflinching. "We fight. Together." Flash exhaled slowly. "I've never been one to back down from a fight." "I know." She gave him a small, calculating smile. "But this won't be like anything you faced before. The Myrethi are relentless. They will stop at nothing to reclaim me, to reclaim their empire's honor. You don't think we can get away? Flash asked, half doubtful. Not this time, Solara replied firmly. They'll hunt us to the edge of the galaxy. The sound of an incoming signal jolted both of them from their conversation. Flash glanced at the screen. This time, it wasn't a threat. It was a warning. We are coming. The storm was about to hit. The Myrathi were already on the move, and Flash wasn't about to let them catch him off guard. Get ready, Flash said, his voice low and steady. This is going to be a hell of a fight. Solara nodded, stepping back toward the weapons lockers. There was no running from this. The galaxy had just become a much smaller place for both of them. The storm had finally come. Flash's hands gripped the controls tightly, his knuckles white. He didn't need the flashing red lights to tell him what he already knew. The Myrathi were here, and they weren't wasting any time. The first wave had arrived. Massive warships emerging from the dark expanse of space, their sleek, metallic forms slicing through the void like predators on the hunt. Flash had faced hostile ships before, but this was different. These weren't just any enemies. This was the Myrathi Empire, and they weren't playing games. Get to the weapons systems, Flash barked, already inputting commands into the control panel. The ragged star shook as the first of the enemy fire struck the shields, the ship groaning under the pressure. He was barely keeping it steady, weaving through the incoming blasts as the Myrathi ships closed in on their position. Behind him, Solara's voice was steady, almost calm. We don't have much time. They're locking on. Flash clenched his jaw, his mind racing. I know that, Princess. He maneuvered the ship sharply to the left, narrowly avoiding another barrage of laser fire. The Myrathi weren't pulling any punches. The ship's shields flickered, barely holding against the onslaught, and Flash had only a few more minutes before they were breached. Flash. Solara's voice cut through his thoughts. We need to make a jump. Now. Flash looked over his shoulder at her. She was already at the weapons station, her fingers flying over the controls, her eyes sharp as a hawk. For the first time, Flash saw it. This wasn't just some royal figure, some political pawn. She was a warrior, a force in her own right. I'm not leaving, Flash gritted out, his focus never leaving the view ahead. We fight. I don't run. We don't have the firepower for a prolonged fight. She shot back, her eyes narrowing as she tracked the enemy's movements. We're outmatched, Flash. You know that. He knew. He knew they were outgunned, but he also knew that they were far from done. The Myrathi might have had the numbers, the firepower, but they didn't have the edge. Flash did. He wasn't going down without making them regret it. Solara's hand shot out, grabbing the edge of the console as the ship shook from another impact. Her eyes met his. You can't keep this up forever. I don't plan to, he said through clenched teeth. We're going to hit them where it hurts. Follow my lead. Without waiting for a response, Flash gripped the control lever and slammed the ship into a barrel roll. The ship pitched sharply to the side, and the Myrathi ship's blasters missed by inches. Flash's heart pounded in his chest as the ragged star dipped dangerously close to the edge of a nearby asteroid field. Hold on, Flash called back to Solara, though he knew she was already braced for the chaos. The ship rocked again as another blast hit, but Flash wasn't done yet. He saw the opening, a gap in the Myrathi formation. You've got a clear shot at the lead ship, Solara called out, her voice now tinged with urgency. He didn't hesitate. Flash keyed in the coordinates and activated the ship's torpedoes. The ragged star dipped lower, closing the distance just as the torpedoes launched, cutting through the void like a streak of fire. They slammed into the lead ship, the explosion lighting up the dark space around them, a violent burst of colors that sent shockwaves through the Myrathi fleet. The blast wasn't enough to destroy the entire ship, but it was enough to cause damage, enough to send the rest of the fleet into disarray. Flash grinned, adrenaline surging through him. This was it. They had a chance. Target the remaining ships. Solara shouted, her voice a sharp command. Flash didn't need telling twice. His fingers flew over the controls as he shifted the ship into position, dodging more enemy fire. The Ragged Star was fast, nimble, made for this kind of combat. They weren't out of danger yet, but with Solara at his side, he wasn't backing down. Another volley of shots exploded around them, and Flash twisted the ship at the last second. The weapon systems came online again, and this time, Flash fired the ship's lasers with deadly precision, taking out one of the enemy cruisers. It wasn't a knockout blow, but it was enough to rattle the remaining ships. Solara's voice cut through the chaos. They'll send more reinforcements. We need to move. Now. Flash didn't need to be told twice. He activated the hyperdrive, inputting the coordinates they'd prepared earlier. The ship lurched forward, hurtling into the void as they made their escape, narrowly avoiding the remaining enemy fire. As the stars stretched into streaks of light and the tension began to ease, Flash allowed himself a breath. They weren't out of the woods yet, but they'd just survived the first wave. And for the first time since this madness began, he felt something else. The void outside the Ragged Star was endless, a silent canvas of stars and swirling nebulae that felt cold, alien, and far too vast for any one ship to survive in. But here they were, alone. Flash leaned against the cold metal of the control panel, the hum of the engines a constant reminder that they were still in the fight. Solara stood nearby, her eyes fixed on the endless horizon as the ship's sensors continued to scan for any signs of pursuit. "How long until they catch up with us?" Flash asked, his voice low but edged with weariness. Solara didn't look up. Her hands were folded across her chest, but he could tell she was calculating, weighing options. Her mind never stopped moving. She'd been like this since the battle. Detached, focused. He knew it was her way of keeping control, but Flash wasn't sure if it was helping. "Not long," she said quietly, her voice sharp. "They're sending a fleet. The Myrathi don't let failures go unpunished." Flash gritted his teeth. This was a trap, one that was slowly closing in around them. The Myrathi would stop at nothing to destroy them, to erase the embarrassment of losing a battle so easily. And as much as Flash wanted to blame Solara for dragging him into this mess, he knew the truth. They were both in this together now, whether they liked it or not. A sudden beep from the console snapped Flash out of his thoughts. He stepped forward and glanced at the display, his heart sinking. The sensor grid had lit up like a flare, dozens of ships approaching fast. They were closing in, fast. "Can we outrun them?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Solara's gaze turned hard, her jaw tightening. "No, not unless we jump to hyperspace, and even then, they'll track us." "So we fight," Flash said with grim resolve. Solara's eyes flicked to him, an unreadable expression passing over her features. "You think we can win this?" Flash didn't hesitate. "I don't plan on losing." Her eyes softened ever so slightly, and for the first time since they'd started this whole mess, she seemed to truly see him. But that moment passed in the blink of an eye, replaced once more by the icy resolve that had become her armor. "You're brave," she said, voice almost a whisper, "but bravery alone won't save us." Flash didn't respond, instead heading toward the weapons bay. He wasn't here to debate the odds. They had a ship, a fighter's chance, and one hell of a fight ahead. And for whatever reason, he wasn't about to back down. The ship's warning alarms blared, filling the cockpit with a harsh mechanical noise. Flash punched a button, silencing it. His fingers flew over the control panel, prepping the weapon systems. Behind him, Solara joined him at the controls, her movements precise, her focus sharp. "We need to disable their communications," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos unfolding around them. "If we break their link, we can turn the tide." Flash nodded, already locking on to the closest enemy ship. "Let's do it." The ragged star jolted as the engines roared to life, lurching forward into the black. Flash sent them into a sharp dive, threading through the asteroid field with an agility that only he could manage. The enemy ships closed in from all sides, their weapons charging. Now, Solara's voice rang out as the targeting system locked onto one of the enemy cruisers. Flash hit the trigger. The ship shuddered as the energy beams shot from the ragged star, striking the Mirathi cruiser's communications array. Sparks erupted from the cruiser's hull, sending it into a tumbling spin as it struggled to regain control. Flash grinned, adrenaline surging through his veins. They'd made their first strike. But just as he started to feel the rush of victory, another wave of enemy ships entered the fray, cutting off their escape routes. Flash swore under his breath. They were surrounded. "We're not getting out of this without a fight," Flash muttered, his gaze flicking to Solara. "Get ready." Solara's eyes narrowed, her jaw set in determination. She pulled her blaster from its holster and checked it, her movements swift and precise. "Let's finish this." Flash didn't wait for more words. He pushed the ship into a sharp barrel roll, narrowly avoiding a barrage of laser fire that sliced through the space where they had just been. He wasn't flying blind. Every instinct, every motion, had become second nature in this moment of chaos. The Mirathi were good. Flash had to give them that. But they weren't good enough. He pushed the ship into another dive, using the asteroid field as cover while he adjusted the targeting system once more. One by one, the Mirathi ships fell. Flash's hands were steady, his mind sharp. He wasn't just dodging anymore. He was taking them down. "One more left," Solara called, her voice cold, clinical. Flash didn't even look up. "Let's finish this." The stars outside were still, silent, a distant backdrop to the chaos that had consumed them. The ragged star drifted through space, battered and scarred from the relentless battle. Flash sat in the cockpit, his hands still on the controls, though his body felt like it had been pushed to its limit. He didn't know how long they had been flying, how much time had passed since the Mirathi fleet had retreated. Hours? Days? In this part of the galaxy, time had a way of losing its meaning. Solara was quiet beside him, her expression unreadable as she studied the data streams flashing across the console. The ship had taken heavy damage, and their fuel reserves were nearly gone. They were on the edge now, and both of them knew it. "Do you think they'll come after us again?" Flash asked, breaking the silence. His voice was rough, tired, but there was no hiding the underlying edge of fear that ran beneath his words. He wasn't just asking about the Mirathi Empire. He was asking about the future, about what came next, about what they'd become. Solara didn't look at him at first. Instead, she reached forward, her fingers dancing over the controls with practiced precision. The faint hum of the ship was the only sound that filled the cockpit for a moment. "They'll come," she said quietly, her voice like ice, cold and unwavering. "The Mirathi never give up." Flash nodded. "Then we keep moving." Her eyes flicked toward him, her gaze intense. "And where do you think you're going? You think we can just outrun them forever?" "I think we fight," Flash replied, leaning forward in his seat, his voice steady. "We make our stand." A long silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Solara's jaw tightened, and Flash could see the wariness in her eyes. She had no love for the Empire, but she had her doubts about their chances too. They both did. "We don't have the resources for another fight like that," she said, shaking her head. "They have more ships, more weapons. We're running on fumes." "I know." Flash exhaled, his fingers drumming on the armrest. He wasn't a fool. He knew the odds. "But I'm not running anymore." Solara turned to face him fully now, her eyes sharp, challenging. "You want to make a last stand." "It's our best shot," Flash said, his gaze meeting hers. "And I'm not backing down." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Solara sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly as if the weight of the situation was pressing down on her. "You're stubborn," she said, but there was a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "I'll give you that." Flash grinned, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Takes one to know one." She didn't smile back, but there was a flicker of something. Respect, maybe. Something that hadn't been there before. "All right," Solara said, her voice suddenly decisive. "You want to fight. Then we fight. But we do it on our terms. We'll need to make a run for the Myrathi outpost on Koran. If we can get there, we can get the weapons we need to make a real stand." Flash felt a surge of hope at her words. It was a risky move, a gamble, but it was the only option they had left. "How do we get there?" "We'll have to make the jump to hyperspace," Solara replied, her eyes scanning the star maps, her fingers flying over the console. "But it won't be easy. The Myrathi will be watching for us." "Then we make it look like we're running," Flash said, his mind already working. "We'll set a false course, lead them to think we're retreating. Then, when they least expect it, we make the jump." Solara's gaze met his again, her eyes calculating. For a brief moment, the tension between them seemed to dissipate. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were taking control. She nodded. "I'll set the course." Flash didn't wait for anything more. He slammed the throttle forward, sending the ragged star hurtling into the void. They were heading straight for Koran, and every second counted. They couldn't afford to waste a single moment. The ship shook as the engines powered up, the soft hum of the hyperdrive building in intensity. Flash's fingers tightened on the controls. The course was set. The plan was in motion. The Myrathi were coming for them. But they weren't the only ones making moves. Flash and Solara were ready to take their fate into their own hands. As the stars stretched into streaks of light, Flash allowed himself the single thought, a fleeting hope, a whisper in the dark. Maybe this time they would win.